History is a story of machines, great steel machines of war, tanks, battleships, bombers, great political machines that move nations. But sometimes, history is changed not by the machine, but by the ghost within it, a flaw in the design that becomes an unexpected weapon. A single, seemingly insignificant component that, under impossible pressure, rewrites the entire equation of a war. In the summer of 1942, America was a nation building the largest war machine the world had ever seen. Factories churned out planes and tanks. Shipyards launched vessels faster than the enemy could sink them. And recruitment offices were flooded with the young men who would serve as the cogs in this great endeavor. They were looking for the ideal component: tall, strong, the picture of health. On a hot June day in Greenville, Texas, a boy who was none of those things walked into a U.S. Marine recruiting office. He was 16 years old, though his sister had falsified an affidavit to say he was 18. He stood a mere 5 feet, 5 inches tall, and weighed a scant 110 pounds, his frame hardened but not filled out by years of hard labor and scarcity. The Marine recruiter, a man accustomed to seeing the brawn and bravado of Texan farmhands, didn't even bother to look up from his paperwork. Through a cloud of cigarette smoke, he grunted, "Too small," and waved him away. It was a dismissal, a judgment passed in less than 5 seconds. This boy was a faulty part, a manufacturing defect. He tried the Navy. An officer took one look at his boyish face and underweight frame and rejected him. He was a walking liability, too slight to haul ammunition, too small to be a sailor. He then tried the elite Army paratroopers, the vanguard of the American war effort. They were more direct. They laughed and told him to go home, eat a few steaks, and grow up. By every conceivable military standard of the day, this boy was useless. He was the P-38 Lightning that couldn't turn, the Sherman tank with a paper-thin hull. He was a fatal flaw in human form. But the recruiters, in their search for the perfect cog, had made a fatal mistake of their own. They saw a boy, but they failed to see the weapon that the Great Depression had forged. They saw a scrawny kid, but they missed the eyes of a hunter, eyes that had been keeping his family from the brink of starvation for the last 5 years. They saw a flaw in the design. They failed to see the ghost in the machine. This boy's name was Audie Leon Murphy, and in the next 30 months, this undersized, underfed, universally rejected teenager would become a one-man army. He would become the most decorated American soldier of World War II, a man who would single-handedly halt the advance of an entire German infantry company by climbing onto a burning tank destroyer that was moments from exploding, all to save the only family he had left, the men of Company B. This story doesn't begin on the blood-soaked battlefields of Europe. It begins in the crushing, soul-grinding poverty of the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, during the bleakest years of the Dust Bowl. Audie Murphy was the 6th of 12 children, born to Emmett and Josie Murphy, impoverished sharecroppers who moved from one dilapidated farm to the next, forever chasing a debt they could never repay. Life was a relentless cycle of back-breaking labor for pennies a day. By the time he was 5, Audie was picking cotton, his small hands calloused and raw. There was no room for childhood. There was only work and hunger. His father, a man broken by the Depression and his own failings, eventually abandoned the family, walking away one day and never looking back. The full weight of responsibility fell upon Josie and her oldest children. Then, in May of 1941, just after Audie's 16th birthday, Josie died of pneumonia and endocarditis. Her final years were spent in a state of perpetual exhaustion and heartbreak. Suddenly, this 110-pound boy became the head of the household, the sole provider for his younger siblings who were eventually placed in an orphanage. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and his primary tool for survival was a single-shot .22 rifle. His motivation was the gnawing, ever-present fear of starvation. A neighbor from that time, years later, recalled the boy's uncanny marksmanship. It was something beyond skill. It was a kind of grim artistry. "That boy," he said, "could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a rifle most folks couldn't hit the side of a barn with." Murphy's own words on the matter were colder, stripped of any romance. "If I don't hit what I shoot at," he later wrote, "my family doesn't eat tonight." This wasn't sport. It wasn't practice. This was survival reduced to its purest form. Every bullet cost money the family didn't have. Every miss meant empty stomachs, and the hollow eyes of his younger brother and sisters looking to him for a meal that wouldn't come. Under that relentless pressure, Audie Murphy didn't just learn to shoot. He learned to kill. He mastered the cold calculus of the hunt. The patience, the use of terrain, the conservation of energy, the absolute necessity of the first shot being the only shot. He developed a hunter's eye, a state of heightened perception and cold efficiency that would one day terrify battle-hardened German soldiers across 3 countries. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Audie Murphy, like millions of other young men, saw it as a call to action. But for him, it was also a way out. The Army meant steady pay, 3 meals a day, and a monthly allotment he could send home to his sister to help care for their siblings. It was a chance to escape the cotton fields and, for the first time in his life, have a purpose beyond mere survival. But he was still only 16, and still desperately underweight. After being laughed out of the Marines, Navy, and paratroopers, he walked into the office of the regular Army infantry. The recruiter looked at the forged affidavit from his sister Corinne, which brazenly claimed he was 18. He looked at the boy, who could have passed for 14. He saw the fierce determination in his eyes, a look he'd seen in thousands of other desperate kids. The recruiter sighed, perhaps seeing a bit of his own past, and stamped the papers. On June 30th, 1942, the United States Army had, without any inkling of what it had just done, accepted a field modification that would save hundreds of American lives by breaking every rule in the book. Private First Class David "Mouse" Moreau, who went through basic training with Murphy at Camp Walters, Texas, recalled their first impressions. "We all thought he was a mascot. He looked like a child who'd gotten lost. The drill sergeants were merciless. They rode him harder than anyone, called him baby, made him do push-ups until he collapsed. But then they got to the rifle range. Those baby blue eyes of his went cold as a winter morning," Moreau continued. "He never missed, not once. He qualified as an expert marksman, the highest rating. The sergeants stopped calling him baby after that. They didn't know what to make of him. He was quiet, kept to himself. But with a rifle in his hands, he was something else entirely. He was lethal." In early 1943, Murphy was assigned to Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. On July 10, 1943, he landed at Licata, Sicily, as part of Operation Husky. It was here, in the rugged, sun-baked mountains of Sicily, that the hidden truth of Audie Murphy was finally unleashed. His rural upbringing meant he moved with a silence and stealth that baffled his city-bred comrades. He understood terrain instinctively, using every rock and fold in the ground for cover, and he shot with that same deadly cold accuracy he'd honed in the Texas cotton fields. Near Palermo, his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun nest perched on a rocky ridge. This was his first real combat problem. Standard doctrine said to hold position, wait for artillery or air support. But Murphy's doctrine, ingrained in him by years of hunger, was simpler. "My family doesn't eat." While the rest of his platoon took cover, Private Murphy, the 110-pound baby, used his knowledge of terrain to work his way silently and alone up the treacherous slope, flanking the enemy position. He eliminated the entire German crew with strategically thrown grenades. Then, in a move that would become his signature, he turned their own MG-42 machine gun on the retreating German forces, breaking their counterattack before it could even form. His company commander, Captain Paul Harris, recommended him for a Bronze Star, writing in his report, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is nothing short of extraordinary." Extraordinary was an understatement. In that moment, Audie Murphy had discovered something profound and deeply unsettling about himself, a truth that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was exceptionally, preternaturally good at killing. Sicily was just the beginning. The brutal Italian campaign, a slow, grinding crawl up the mountainous spine of the country, is where Murphy transformed from a good soldier into a walking nightmare for the Wehrmacht. At the Volturno River in October 1943, his squad was ambushed during a night patrol and decimated by a German counterattack. Instead of retreating, Murphy took cover, grabbed a borrowed sniper rifle, and single-handedly held the German advance at bay, picking off enemy soldiers in the darkness. 5 German soldiers were killed at over 300 yards. For this action, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest medal in the U.S. Army. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a force of nature on the battlefield. Staff Sergeant William Pilson, a squad leader in Company B, described Murphy's method. "Murph didn't fight angry. That's what was so damn terrifying about him. He fought cold, calculated, like he was doing arithmetic in his head. See a German? Eliminate the German. Move to the next German. There was no emotion, no hesitation, just deadly, terrifying efficiency." Then came the Anzio beachhead in early 1944, the meat grinder that Winston Churchill called the Wildcat. Here, the problem was a German tank, the one thing infantry fears most. Murphy, armed with a bazooka, didn't just fire from a safe distance. He crawled forward, using the cratered landscape for cover, until he was at near point-blank range, ensuring a direct hit that destroyed the tank and its crew. He was awarded his first Silver Star. He survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He'd been wounded. He'd been promoted to sergeant. The too small farm boy now had a reputation that preceded him. But in August 1944, during the Allied invasion of southern France, came the test that changed everything. Near Montélimar, France, his platoon was ambushed in a vineyard. His best friend, Laddie Tipton, advanced toward a German machine gun nest that was feigning surrender. It was a trap. The Germans opened fire, killing Tipton instantly. Something inside Murphy broke. He went, in his own words, cold mad. He single-handedly charged the German position, killing the crew, and then used their own weapon to systematically eliminate every German soldier in the immediate vicinity. He had survived, but his friend was gone. Days later, his platoon faced another crisis. The problem: his lieutenant, the platoon commander, was killed in the opening volley of an ambush. The chain of command was broken. Sergeant Murphy didn't wait for orders. He became the order. He took command of the platoon. The situation was impossible. 18 Americans against a German company of over 100. For 2 hours, Sergeant Murphy held a critical crossroads, directing his men, exposing himself to withering fire, and personally accounting for 15 enemy dead. He held the line. The Army, finally realizing what it had, gave him a battlefield commission. On October 14, 1944, the kid who was too small to enlist was now Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. But combat has a price. By January 1945, Murphy was no longer the 16-year-old boy who had walked into that recruiting office. He was 19, but he looked 40. His eyes, once baby blue, were now a flat, pale gray, haunted by the things they had seen. He had seen almost every one of his original friends from Company B killed or wounded. He had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers, and now he and the shattered remnants of his company faced the Colmar Pocket. The Colmar Pocket was the last major piece of French soil the Wehrmacht controlled. Hitler, in a fit of rage, had ordered it held at all costs. To enforce his will, he had sent his best. The 2nd Mountain Division, the elite Gebirgsjäger. These were not conscripts. They were veterans of the brutal winters of Norway and the Eastern Front, transferred specifically for this offensive. For Company B, the situation wasn't desperate. It was over. Look at the mathematics. In 5 days of constant, brutal fighting in the freezing forests of Alsace, Company B had been bled white. From a full strength of 187 men, they were down to 40 effectives. All officers, except for the newly commissioned Murphy, had been killed or evacuated. Murphy himself was fighting with a fresh leg wound from shrapnel. He told no one. Private Anthony Abramsky, one of the few remaining veterans in the company, described their condition. "We were finished, done. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. Half the guys had frostbite. Our machine guns were freezing up. We tried to dig foxholes, but the ground was like iron." January 26, 1945. The dawn was gray and bitter cold over the Holtzwihr forest. Company B was strung out in a thin, pathetic line along the edge of the woods. In front of them, a mile of open, frozen ground, dusted with snow. They were, as Abramsky said, sitting ducks. Murphy had positioned his only anti-tank capability, 2 M10 tank destroyers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, to cover the open field. He had his 40 exhausted men, and he had a field telephone line to division artillery, his only real hope. At 1 p.m., the German artillery barrage began. It was a terrifying symphony of destruction. Tree bursts, shells timed to explode in the treetops, showered the frozen ground with a rain of deadly hot steel and splintered wood. It lasted for 30 minutes. At 1:40 p.m., the attack came. Private First Class Donald Ekman was the first to see them. "You could see the pennants on the antennas of the German tanks," he recalled. 6 of them. And behind them, Jesus Christ, 250 infantry, all in white snow camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts. Murphy's first action was to call for artillery support, but artillery alone wouldn't stop this. The Germans were too spread out, too numerous, moving too fast. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers opened fire. Their first shots went wide. The crews were exhausted, their hands numb from the biting cold. The return fire from the German panzers was immediate and devastating. An 82 mm shell struck the rear M10 squarely in the turret. It erupted in a ball of flame. The crew scrambled out, running for the relative safety of the woods. The forward M10, trying to maneuver, slid sideways into a drainage ditch. Its tracks couldn't find a grip on the frozen ground. Its crew, facing the onslaught alone, abandoned it and retreated. It was 2:20 p.m. Both tank destroyers were out of action. The German infantry was now closing to within 200 yards. This was the breaking point, the moment the position would be overrun and Company B would cease to exist. This is when Lieutenant Murphy made the decision that would defy all military doctrine, all logic, and all instinct for self-preservation. He ordered his remaining 40 men to fall back. "Fall back!" he yelled. "Back to the woods!" But he himself did not retreat. Instead, as his men ran for cover, Lieutenant Audie Murphy ran forward. He ran through the continuing artillery and machine gun fire. He ran towards the burning, abandoned M10 tank destroyer. The vehicle was now fully engulfed in flames at the rear. Thick, black, oily smoke poured from the hull. At any moment, the thousands of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition and the 300 gallons of diesel fuel inside would explode, turning the vehicle into a massive, shredded bomb. Murphy didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the back of the burning, ticking bomb and manned its .50 caliber machine gun. From this position, he was a perfect target. A single silhouetted figure standing on top of a pyre, completely exposed to 250 rifles and 6 tanks. Private Abramski watched in disbelief from the woods. I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer. It was the greatest display of guts and courage I have ever seen. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun is a devastating weapon. In the hands of Audie Murphy, it became an instrument of precise, methodical destruction. The hunter's eye from the Texas cotton fields took over. For the next hour, this 19-year-old, 110-pound boy became a one-man army. He wasn't just firing, he was calculating. He held the field telephone in one hand, calmly calling in artillery strikes, adjusting their fall to create a wall of steel around him. He held the trigger of the .50 cal in the other. Sergeant Elmer Brawley observed from the wood's edge. The German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the draws, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them. The elite German mountain troops found themselves in an impossible trap. Their tanks, which should have crushed the position in seconds, were now useless. They could not advance without their infantry, and their infantry was being systematically annihilated by a single machine gun, firing from inside a cloud of black smoke. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, watching from the battalion command post, testified. Murphy's fire was incredibly effective. He wasn't just spraying bullets. Every burst was aimed. He was picking off German infantry like he was at a shooting gallery. I saw him cut down an entire squad that was trying to flank our position. The Germans tried everything. They hit the tank destroyer with shells. Shrapnel tore through Murphy's leg, his second wound of the day. He ignored it. He just kept firing. He just kept calling in artillery, drawing the circle of explosions tighter and tighter around his own position. At 3:10 p.m., after 40 minutes of continuous firing, the .50 caliber started to slow. He was running out of ammunition. The Germans sensed it and started to rush forward. This was the end. Murphy made his last, most desperate call. He ordered the artillery to fire directly on his own position. The forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weispfenning, refused. He knew it would mean certain death for Murphy. Murphy screamed into the phone, a voice of pure command cutting through the chaos. "I'm giving you a direct order. Fire on my position now." The first 105mm shells landed 50 yards away. The explosions threw frozen earth and shrapnel in all directions. The German infantry, caught in the open, were torn apart. The combination of his direct fire and the artillery exploding all around him finally broke the German attack. The surviving infantry, perhaps 100 men, turned and ran. The tanks, now without any support, reversed course and withdrew. It was 3:20 p.m. After one impossible hour, the attack was over. Audie Murphy, his uniform scorched, his leg bleeding, finally climbed down from the M10. 10 minutes later, the tank destroyer exploded in a massive fireball. He walked calmly back to the wood line where his men waited, stunned into silence. According to Private Abramski, he was scary calm. He asked if they had any casualties, made sure everyone was okay, then sat down, lit a cigarette, and asked for a status report. His hands weren't even shaking. On that day, Audie Murphy killed or wounded an estimated 50 German soldiers. He had, alone, stopped a combined arms assault by 250 elite troops and 6 tanks. He had saved his company from certain destruction. The battlefield was a scene of devastation. German bodies lay scattered across the snow-covered fields. The elite 2nd Mountain Division, the veterans of Norway, were in full retreat. But perhaps the most shocking part of this story is the silence that followed. In the decades after the war, historians searched the German military archives, the veteran organizations, the personal diaries, looking for the German account of that day. They found almost nothing. This silence is the real proof of what Audie Murphy did. The idea that 250 of their best men, supported by 6 tanks, were not just defeated, but humiliated by one 110-pound American boy standing on a burning tank, was a tactical defeat so shameful, so incomprehensible, they simply erased it from their history. The successful defense of the Holzwehr forest broke the back of German resistance in all of Alsace. Within weeks, the entire Colmar pocket was eliminated. The too small farm boy had just changed the map of the war. On June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch formally presented Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy with the nation's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. When asked later why he had climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, why he had performed that suicidal action, his response was simple and utterly without ego. "They were killing my friends." The war in Europe ended. The guns fell silent. Audie Murphy came home. He was a national hero. His boyish face was on the cover of Life magazine. He was given parades. Hollywood came calling, and he became a movie star, starring in over 40 films, including the story of his own life, To Hell and Back. To the public, this was the perfect Hollywood ending, the ultimate rags-to-riches story. But this is not where Audie Murphy's story ends. This is where the real war, the silent, unsung war, begins. The public saw Audie Murphy, the hero. They did not see the fatal flaw the war had left inside him. The man who had shown no fear on top of a burning tank was now terrified of the dark. Murphy suffered from a severe, chronic case of what was then called battle fatigue. We now know it as post-traumatic stress disorder. He was plagued by chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, and a state of hypervigilance that led him to sleep with a loaded pistol under his pillow every night for the rest of his life. He wasn't haunted by the men he had killed. He was haunted by the men he couldn't save. He was haunted by the face of Laddie Tipton. He had survived, but he had never truly left the battlefield. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares," Murphy wrote. "They became a part of my life, like breathing. A demon seemed to have entered my body." Earm. His first marriage, to actress Wanda Hendricks, lasted only 16 months, destroyed by his invisible wounds. Hendricks described him as 2 people, the charming, funny, generous man during the day, and a tormented soul at night who would patrol their house with a loaded gun, reliving battles from years earlier. The war had ended for America, but it had never ended for Audie Murphy. He was fighting a new enemy, an invisible one, and it was an enemy he couldn't defeat with a rifle. Despite his own struggles, Murphy became one of the first and most important public advocates for veterans' mental health. In the 1960s, he broke the code of silence. He spoke publicly about his nightmares, his insomnia, his demons. In a time when battle fatigue was seen as a sign of weakness or cowardice, America's greatest hero stood up and said, "I have it. He was once again the man on the front line, fighting for his friends, but this time, the friends were the thousands of veterans returning from Korea and Vietnam with the same invisible wounds. But in this fight, he wasn't entirely alone." In 1951, he married Pamela Archer. And this is the other missing page of the Audie Murphy legend. This is the story of the other hero. Pamela was a former airline stewardess, a woman of quiet strength and profound empathy. She saw the 2 men inside Audie, the celebrated hero and the tormented demon. And unlike everyone else, she did not run. For 20 years, Pamela stood by him. She was his anchor in the storm of his own mind. She helped him raise 2 sons. She endured the nightmares. She supported his advocacy. She was the crew chief for the hero who was still at war. Then, on May 28, 1971, the impossible happened. Audie Murphy, the man who had survived every conceivable horror of war, died at age 45, not in battle, but in a private plane crash in the mountains of Virginia during a storm. America mourned its greatest hero. But for Pamela Murphy, the real mission was just beginning. After Audie's death, the world discovered another shocking fact. The most decorated soldier in American history, the Hollywood star, had died in debt. Bad investments and mismanagement by others had left his estate, and his wife Pamela, with almost nothing. She was a 50-year-old widow with 2 teenage sons and a mountain of her late husband's debts. This was her Colmar pocket, her impossible situation. The world expected her to fade away, but they forgot who she was. She was the woman who had stood by Audie Murphy for 20 years. She was a warrior in her own right. She did something that defied all expectation. She didn't write a tell-all book. She didn't sell his medals. Instead, Pamela Murphy, the widow of America's greatest hero, walked into the Sepulveda Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles and asked for a job. She didn't use her famous name to get a high-level position. She took a job as a simple clerk, a patient liaison. This was her climbing on the burning tank. For the next 35 years, Pamela Murphy dedicated her life to Audie's other war. She arrived at the hospital every morning, sat at her small desk, and became a one-woman army for the veterans nobody else would listen to. She saw veterans shattered by Vietnam, suffering from the same demons that had haunted her husband. She saw them getting lost in the bureaucracy, their files misplaced, their benefits denied. These men were the ghosts of her husband, and Pamela Murphy would not abandon them. She became their advocate. She used her quiet dignity and the profound moral authority her name carried to cut through the red tape. When a doctor wouldn't see a veteran, she made the call. When a benefit check was lost, she found it. When a bureaucrat said no, Pamela Murphy was the one who walked into their office and did not leave until that no became a yes. She was Audie's final and most powerful field modification. She wasn't just preserving his memory. She was finishing his mission. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, was named in his honor. But Pamela was his living memorial, a 35-year-long testament to the promise to leave no man behind. His true legacy is twofold. First, because America's greatest hero admitted he was haunted, thousands of other veterans, for the first time, felt they could ask for help. He gave them the permission to be human. The second is Pamela Murphy. She worked at that VA hospital until she was 87 years old, retiring in 2007. She never remarried. When she died in 2010, she was buried next to him at Arlington National Cemetery. The mechanic reunited with her pilot. The world saw a hero. Pamela saw a man. The recruiters saw a fatal flaw. The Army found a secret weapon. The Germans saw an impossible situation. Audie Murphy just saw a problem that needed fixing. It all comes back to that one fact. The 110-pound farm boy, who was too small to be a soldier, became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. And in doing so, he and the quiet, unsung hero who loved him saved thousands more, long after the guns fell silent.